You know, I get up in the morning, I try to go find a place to get something to eat, like Shalom's here. And that's not every day of the week that we can do that. On the weekends, we can't. There is no place to go get something to eat in the morning. I lost my job. Everything got overwhelming. And before I knew it, I was out on the street. You know, I had to go. In the heat, it was easy. They had cooling centers and stuff like that. Right now, it's really cold outside, and they don't have any place for us to go in and get warm, really. They have a couple of the shelters, and they would like all of the homeless in Spokane to be in a shelter, but a lot of us don't want to be in a shelter. So in order for us to stay warm, it's a battle. It's a battle.
I haven't had a home for 5 years. There's been a lot of struggles. I was struggling with a lot. There's a lot of emotions, you know, money, people. I have no support network. So I'm deaf, and it makes it really hard. So I don't have a home because my first wife died in 2000. She was hit while riding her bike by a car and she died. And I left. I get to meet a lot of people under the bridges. It doesn't matter if it's cold or hot, like people are out here. People join together. I try to look for a house for myself, and that's it, just me. I have to do it all myself. There's not a lot of help. I just gotta keep busy. And I'm always helping other people. But I never make time for myself. And I love to help others. And that can be a problem. I like to help other people because I don't like to see other people suffer. I know what it feels like, so I want to help them. There's just many different agencies and groups, but there's problems communicating because of interpreters. There's only like 4 places that have interpreter, and it's hard because, you know, it costs money, and who's going to pay for interpreters everywhere? Sometimes there's no interpreter. And deaf people have to go, and we have to write it out, and it's just a back and forth. And there are people who are deaf and can't write. I can write. I finished school, I went to college. Some deaf people, there's, you know, they have some disabilities. They're a little slow when it comes to thinking. There's always communication barriers when you live deaf.
When we were homeless, there were 6 of us in my family. It was my mom, my older brother, myself, and my 3 younger sisters. I remember in the summer, right before I started my senior year of high school, my mom got really, really ill, and she ended up being diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder. And that resulted in her losing her job due to being sick and falling in attendance. and also resulted in her falling behind on rent. It started off with couch surfing for a little while. We were a big family, there were 6 of us again, so half of us were staying with a friend of my mom's, and the other half of us were staying at my uncle's house. It was kind of hard for us to be separated, but again, 6 people is kind of a lot to spring on one person at a time. And that situation was working for a while. It was about 2 or 3 months before ultimately there was kind of a falling out. And at that point, we moved in, all of us with our uncles, and there were 6 of us staying in one room at the time. We felt like we were in a cage. I remember there was only enough room for the beds in there, so there was a big queen-size bed, and me and my mom were sleeping on that, and next to us there was a bunk bed, and 2 of my sisters and my brother were sharing that. And my youngest sister at the time was 10, so she was just small enough to sleep in that little crook between the beds. And that was working again maybe 2 or 3 months before it kind of got to the point where we could tell that the people we were staying with were not comfortable with us being there anymore. And we also weren't comfortable with being there, you know, all trapped together in that room all day, every day, not really any sort of freedom. So that is what ended up ultimately in us moving into a hotel. We spent all the money that we had saved to get a new place, to move into the hotel. And while it was really terrible to give up that savings, it really was the thing that we needed to give us a slight peace of mind. And just to have a space where we kind of understood that we weren't burdening anybody else and that we could be together in relative peace. It was a really endless cycle at that point. All of our money was going towards staying in that hotel. And it wasn't a nice one, but it's still expensive, especially with 6 people. So we were there for about 6 months, and there was really no sign of getting out of it, unfortunately. It was a really difficult time for us, for sure. We never had access to a kitchen, so we all declined grossly in health because all we were eating was packaged and processed foods, and that ultimately resulted in us being really lethargic and depressed, and that already built upon the stress we were feeling being in a situation where, you know, you're in unstable and permanent housing and you don't know how you're going to escape that cycle. I think the most important thing when it comes to housing insecurity is just really noticing the people in your life who maybe are acting different or who are struggling, and taking the time to reach out to them and ask them what's going on and help them in every way that you can, even if it's just lending a shoulder for them to cry on. I think at the time when I was homeless, the thing I really struggled with the most is just not having anybody who could understand my situation or really cared to ask.
So there's all sorts of different ways in which people become homeless, and that ranges from someone's partner dying, someone's husband dying, they can't maintain the rent anymore and they put out on the street, to mental health issues, to post-traumatic stress disorder, to losing your job, moving to your car, then losing the ability to do that. So there's all different ways that people wind up on the street. I think the important thing for us to recognize is all of the assumptions that go into accessing healthcare, which make it so that people can't access care. You know, the assumption that they have the ability to schedule in advance, that they have a phone, that they have an address for referrals, all these things keep people from being able to access care. So we have the privilege on street medicine of being able to spend the time with people, build the relationships to actually address their needs right when we see them. And it's incredibly rewarding work, and it's also really, really appreciated and recognized by people on the street. The thing that surprised me the most about starting to do street medicine was the level of isolation that people are in on the street. You know, the amount of close contacts or relationships they have are pretty minimal. They're pretty lonely, and how much they really appreciate anyone taking them seriously, looking at them as a person and trying to address their needs. They're incredibly grateful. And so I think that's the most important thing to recognize, is not the drugs or substance abuse or mess that shows up in the news, but that these are people in need of support. And they do recover. You know, many of the people that we work with in the homeless outreach community are people who have been in recovery, are some of the sweetest and kindest people that I've ever met. And you know, just today, we got to say goodbye to someone who is moving back home somewhere safe after getting in crisis stabilization, after addressing substance use, after getting all medical issues taken care of, and she's got a new chance in life and was very excited to give us a hug and say goodbye, and that's really the way we need to have these conversations, is around the care of people as opposed to the homeless problem, in the same way that people talk about the litter box problem, right, or the stray cat problem. These are people that are deserving of our respect and are often, we're not as far away from as we might think. Most families are a paycheck or two away from being on the street. We have essentially a 0% vacancy rate in Spokane, so it's not like there's an easy way to find new housing once you lose it.
This time of year, winter in the Pacific Northwest is rough. It's cold, it's windy, snow, rain, and so it's very tough on our houseless friends. In addition to dealing with their normal chronic medical problems, which could be high blood pressure, diabetes, and such, they're dealing with exposure and are at high risk for hypothermia, frostbite, and just in general the discomfort of being cold all the time. And unfortunately, over the last couple of years, we just have lost resources, places for people to go, to be out of the weather, to be able to use the bathroom, to get some hot food inside. And we are fortunate now that a lot of our partners are reopening the shelters and day centers that provide food and shelter for our friends during these very cold and miserable days of winter.
We're gathering to celebrate those lives of people we lost in 2022 in our community, people who are living without homes. I would like to talk specifically about the relationship between having no home, no roof over your head, and health. We've seen over 3,000 people with our street medicine team. We've seen over 20,000 unique patients in our clinics who struggle with their housing, including those with living on the streets, those in transitional housing, those who may be couch surfing or maybe staying with friends. And that has added up to over 100,000 visits with people without housing in our clinics. We know that those people who live without housing, on average, die 12 years earlier than those who do have housing. So this is a really big impact to health. Both having illness and chronic illness can lead to homelessness, and the opposite is true too, that homelessness can lead to illnesses and make those illnesses worse. Particularly in physical labor jobs where you get an injury, you're not able to go to work because you're trying to recover from that injury, a paycheck or two goes by and you have moved into that homelessness. I've heard this story over and over again in our clinics. This also occurs with behavioral health. You may have some severe depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder, which could be treatable. Alcohol abuse disorder, drug use disorder, all of these things are treatable conditions, but when left untreated or without the resources you need, can lead to homelessness. The opposite of that, as I mentioned, is true too. So if someone is without housing, it makes it that much more difficult to find a good health environment to maintain that health. So if you have a chronic condition, for example, like hypertension or diabetes, getting to those appointments, getting to those medications, holding on to those medications so they don't get stolen or lost when you're carrying everything you need on your back, those can be things that are major challenges. Transportation as well is a major challenge for those needing to get access for care for those chronic conditions. Additionally, being without a home is also a dangerous condition because of the environments and things that you can be exposed to that lead to illness in the first place. The increased access to infectious diseases such as respiratory illnesses or being in conditions where it's more likely to obtain an infection such as hepatitis C or HIV all create more illness from being in a place that is not stable. Additionally, there's increased exposures to violence that can lead to injury, difficult access to good nutrition that helps keep people healthy, and environments that can help maintain that health and safety. Similarly, recovery is very difficult when you don't have a stable housing. I've tried to send people for colonoscopies, but they don't have a stable place to be able to do the prep work that they need. People who get surgeries and need, such as a knee surgery or shoulder, and need to do that rehabilitation with the physical therapist and have a place where they can do that. Those things are all limited, and really the surgery itself is not accessible until you have that stable type of environment. And until you have that surgery, it's very difficult to get and maintain work. All of these things are barriers to folks with homelessness. And I've seen this time and time again, especially with the chronic conditions in the office. I'll have a patient coming to see me, they have their blood pressure controlled, they have their diabetes controlled. We are working on improving the health status of their lives. Something happens, some event, they lose their housing. I don't see them for 6 months at a time, and they come back in poorer condition, and their lives are shortened by not having these diseases controlled. As healthcare providers, we do all we can to mitigate the effects of homelessness when we care for our patients, but there's no amount of healthcare that can replace the effects of having stable housing.
Nationally, on the winter solstice, communities around the nation gather to honor those who've passed. So today we would like to read the names of those in our communities who we've lost, who have lived unsheltered.
Jeshlina M., Matthew J., Peggy P., Jim W., John Thomas T., Leslie T.,
Becky K., Hector A., Richard M., Melvin J., Brent G., Ignati V., David K.
Evdikia K., Courtney N., Angelito E., May M., Thomas T., John S.
John M., Nina A., Matthew B., Daniel H., Marlene L., Ruth V.
Annette M., Lloyd B., Tim C., Penny C., Bradley G., Michael H.
Roger L., Frank S., Lisa E., Bradley S., Pacifico B., Claude T., Adam S., Mirtha J.
Robert G., Brenda L., Dennis T., Alyssa W., Sharon M., Nathan G.
Russell G., Richard S., Bernadette Q., Cynthia M., Julie O., Alicia D.
Nashley S., Jenna S., Craig L., Ken C., Terry S., Fatima H., Roy G., Cody C.
Rana Joe W., Kenneth B., Jimena D., Elizabeth P., Jeremiah P., Mary S.
Rochelle D., Jennifer M., Tanya C., J. C., Lynn M., Scott H.
Louis C., Mary D., Shannon N., Carson D., Angel W., Kevin M., Ronald C., Charlotte H.
Wayne E., Claude P., Kevin M., Teresa S., Lloyd J., Nicole R.
Gordon V., Gregory H., Melbourne F, Francis R, Kenneth L, Letitia C, Elizabeth H, Anna B.
Kenny M, James R, Darren S, Richard B, Mike C, Nakasha M.
Gerald G, Dreamer, Jason K, Brian W, Donald S, Paige R, Kimberly J, James P, Timothy C, Lori B, Nicole J, Jeffrey B.
Thomas M, Amanda W, David W, Ronald W, Wynette G, Larry M, Randy B, Robert M,
Mary D, Laura N, Brian B, Tammy T, Richard W, Jeannie C, Martin S,
Nikki L, Elena T, Matthew I, Roger M, Helen R, Jeffrey S.
Sandra W, Jeffrey B, Thomas M, Carol R, Peter S, Garrett C.
Harley K, Mindy T, Frederick P, Edna M, Brett H, Jenny H.
We think it equally important to recognize and reflect on folks that have died out here in the streets, that were unnamed, unrecognized, maybe died in great loneliness and fear and despair.
As a longtime physician in our community, I've taken to reading the obituaries. I've known a lot of patients over the years, a lot of people over the years, and sometimes I'll see a familiar face of somebody that I knew at one point in their lives. And one thing I've noticed is that some people get obituaries and some people don't. And this is one of those representations of people who are lost throughout the year, who don't necessarily have their own recognition of the lives that they lived. I'd like to share an obituary for those people that we've lost this year in 2022. This is an obituary adapted from a similar work by Bob Orwig. An obituary for a homeless man. He died November 2022 of exposure in a tent, hidden under the end of a train bridge. His name is unknown. He is survived by unknown family. He may have been a veteran. He was once somebody's baby, probably cherished and loved by someone for at least a brief period of his life. He had some struggles, but don't we all? He was brilliant at being who he was. He was one of a kind. He had given up on life and life had given up on him. He was preceded in death by some of his fellows in the same predicament, in his same community. He was preceded in death by loss of community. His fate was determined by our inability to recreate a basic neighborhood concept of life and support. His service will be shared with other named and unnamed persons lost this year to the preventable disease called homelessness. Thank you on behalf of myself and CHAS Health.